Good evening, everyone. I'm Caesar Rondina. It's October 14th. This is the second Monday of the month. Therefore, that makes that our video blog post time. So, the topic for tonight is racism. And initially, when I thought of this topic, it was going to be a written blog post. And I actually decided to change that over to a video blog post. The reason I did that, because it's a very personal topic to talk about. People take it quite personally, as we all know. And sometimes in the written words, you just can't convey everything. Sometimes you need a little body language and so on to get the real message. So I'm not going to waste everybody's time giving you the history of racism. We all know where it came from. Many years ago, we actually reached a period of time in our society where racism wasn't as much in the forefront as it has now become over the past 2 to 3 years. Yes, we all know that every time there's an incident with law enforcement or so on and so forth, a lot of people play the race card. And I'm not going to sit here and try to say to you that's not true. It never happens, because I'm sure it does. And I don't have the intimate details on that, so I'm really not going to speak to it. But we have to understand that it certainly is a possibility. There's been many cases where it's been found to be true and the appropriate measures have been taken. But that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. We're here to talk about racism as it affects our society. Many years ago, when people thought about racism, they thought it had something to do with Caucasian people versus Afro-American people. And it was always the, pardon the phrase, but it's the way it's termed, black versus white people. Well, racism is now graduated, into a much wider, broader spectrum. Now racism has to do with almost any type of a culture, racism against Muslims, racism against Afro-Americans. And, the term majority and minority, let me let you in a little secret, okay? There's really no majority and minority, all right, like most people think they are, or there is. There's so many more of this people, there's so many more of that type of people. You know what? You got to get away from that concept, okay? Because the bottom line is, in every culture, in every color, race, or creed, there is a minority aspect to that, okay? So with that being said, when you have that minority aspect to it for every race, culture, and creed, then everybody's a victim of racism. I mean, doesn't that make sense? Now, when we talk about racism, we have to think of it as a society, all right? And we've all heard this phrase before, and it's true. Children aren't born racist. They're taught to be that way. Now, I have to say society has really done well in the department of our younger generation and our young children growing up today, because things are more equalized in the school systems. So therefore, the exposure to different cultures, races, colors, creeds, so on and so forth, is there for our youth that wasn't there many, many years ago. However, our youth is only going to learn by our example. And if the adults in our society don't set the proper example, then can our youth be swayed? Absolutely. Can the youth be swayed by the media? Absolutely. So there's so many factors out there that take a child from birth who is not born a racist, they don't have a racist bone in their body, to skewing their perception as they get older and older and older. And they also may have some life experiences that may affect that as well. The big question is, how do we cure this? This is certainly not something that should ever go on forever. Actually, it should have ended years ago, because we're all intelligent people. We're all adults. So the only way to cure it is it starts with people. It starts with society. Our society only grows and embellishes itself is if it learns, and it learns from its mistakes and moves forward in a positive direction. And that's what our society has kind of like stalled, I believe, at this point in time. We're kind of stalled in this being stagnant and not moving forward, because we all know in the political arena what's been going on recently with our president and accusations of being racist and so on and so forth. Now, understand with racism, racism is not a term that has to be violent or violence presents with it. It could be simple discrimination. It could be basic human rights. There may be no violence involved in it at all. It just might be harassment at work. It could be anything. And it all kind of lumps into this big cesspool of a term that we call racism. But the question is, and what I want you to think about in tonight's video blog post is, if you are a person that is racist, and I'm not accusing anybody of being that way, but if you are, you know who you are, ask yourself this question: why? You know, many people feel that they've been discriminated against because of jobs given to what is termed minority people. And I think I've already established the fact that there's minorities in every race, color, and creed. So it really doesn't make a difference what color your skin is, okay, to say you're a majority versus a minority. And, you know, certain laws have been passed over the years to make sure that people are treated equally and hired equally. So are there those of you out there that might be of a specific color that has lost a job to somebody of another color because you feel a quota had to be met? We all know with certain types of laws that quota is there. And you might not think that it's fair, but the reality is, why is it unfair? Ask yourself that question. Why is it fair that, say, all Caucasian people get jobs and not Afro-Americans or not Muslims or not any other religious belief, or Asian for that matter? Okay, it doesn't really make a difference what the culture we're talking about here. Why is it fair for anyone of those to get all the jobs? Simply, it's not. You don't have to like it, but it's a simple fact. If you want to sit back and just be honest with yourself for a second, it is not fair. Things do need to be equal. All right. So it's not really all about you as much as you may think it is. And as long as we have this mentality in our society that it is only about me or only about us or only about my type of people, racism is never going to go away. Now, I will admit that in my personal opinion, I do think that a lot of people use the race card, as I'm going to call it, and they'll use the term they're being discriminated against because of their race as a tool. And legitimately, it may not be happening, but because it's such a controversial topic, as soon as somebody raises that word that they're being discriminated against because of their race, then all of a sudden everybody runs scared. So do I think there's times that it's used as a tool and it's not legitimate? Absolutely so. You know, but our society needs to grow from that. It needs to get away from that, because if not, if the society doesn't grow, we stay stagnant and we don't go forward in a positive direction. And that's what's been happening over the last 2 or 3 years. And this is what I really want to bring to your attention for you to think about when we talk about racism. You know, is it being, a couple of the questions, is it being overused? Is it being used as a tool? Is it being used as an excuse? And is it legitimate? Now, investigations are done and these things are investigated. Listen, when I was in corporate management, when we had any cases like this that came up, they were thoroughly investigated. And you know what? When anything is investigated, you're going to find that it's either legitimate or it's not legitimate. If it's legitimate, you're going to make one group of people happy. If it's not legitimate, well, you're going to make another group of people unhappy. And this is what happens oftentimes in law enforcement cases where racism is used and the officer is found to be cleared. And now this leads to community violence, protests, and so on and so forth, instead of people just accepting the fact that possibly there was no racism involved. All right. So stop using the word racism or the term racist against an individual as a tool, because that's not going to help your cause and it's not going to get you any further than where you are. The thing that's going to make us grow and get further as a society is if we accept the fact that no matter what the color of your skin is, there's minority groups in every color group, in every race, in every religion, okay, culture. There's always going to be minorities. So there's no right or wrong. There's no I'm better than you, you're better than me, you get more than I do, I get more than you do. You have to get away from that, because the bottom line is, if everybody tries to better themselves as people and human beings, then things will come to them that they rightfully deserve. If they do not, things will not come to them. I know, again, when I was in corporate management and I had to do hiring process and interviews and we were doing promotions and so on and so forth, I looked at a person's behavior. It wasn't just about, are they qualified for the job on paper? Do they have the knowledge? Do they have the degree? Do they have the managerial skills? How do they treat people? Do they treat people fairly and equally? If they do not, I don't care how much credentials they have, they're not going to get that job and work for me. Bottom line. So there's a lot of aspects to it, and a lot of this goes to social media posts. Some people's social media pages are private, some are public. That's certainly their choice. But I get a kick out of people that put these stupid things on social media, because you know what? Anybody could see it. A potential employer can see it. So you're speaking to your character. So really, you're downing yourself when you're really sometimes making a very stupid statement that doesn't make any sense. And a lot of times people make statements out of opinion, which is fine. We all have the right to our opinion, but it's not based on facts, because facts and opinions are completely different. I could sit here and give you the government statistics and on how many white versus African American versus Muslim people that are arrested, so on and so forth. And you would be shocked, literally shocked, that some of the opinions you have are completely wrong. And this data is not easy to skew, okay, because it's public information. Forms have to be filled out. They have to be filled out properly. So this data is probably about as accurate as we're going to get. So when we talk about racism, I once again say, and I know it's a little repetitive and I don't mean to be, but it's a very important point, okay? Is the term racist or racism being used as a tool for people to get back at somebody, a tool for them to hopefully get ahead themselves, or maybe get something that they haven't earned? All right. And that's the problem that we have in society today. And unless each one of us, myself and every single one of you viewing this, starts to change your mentality about the term and the word racist and racism, and start just worrying about yourself for a change instead of worrying about everybody else. Better yourself. Change your ways of thinking. All right. Believe it or not, that sets an example for your children, your coworkers, and friends, family. And eventually it's like a domino effect. Okay. Eventually it flows, and then the mentality of society starts to change. And until that happens, then we are going to be in what I call a stalled state of social advancement. And that's what we're in now, and that's what we need to change. So those are my thoughts about racism and racists. Like I said, I'm not pointing the finger. I'm not saying any one group does it more than the others. You can make those determinations for yourself. But I think it's common knowledge, because there's not a day that you could turn on the news that something in politics, something with our own president, past presidents, corporations, groups, social groups, you hear something on the news every single day of the week, 365 days a year, about racism. This needs to stop. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the blog post and it gave you some things to think about. God bless.